Okay, so here we go. We are up to the 19th chapter in Yehoshua. You may think you've heard it all. You've not heard it all yet because it keeps getting better. Here's how we have it. What we're going to look at now is the division of the last 6 tribes. We know that it took a little while to divide. First of all, we got the tribe of Yehuda. Then we got the tribe of Manasseh and Ephraim. So we have those first 3 tribes. We know that the east bank has already been divided. We saw last week that we had the centerpiece of Israel, the capital of Israel, which was Shiloh, which was given out. And now once they do that, they divide the last 6 tribes. We started last week with Binyamin, and this week we're going to go through the 6 last tribes. And that goes, the order is going to be Shimon, then it's going to go Zevulun, Yisachar, then we're going to have Asher, Naphtali, Dan on the side over here, and that's going to be and that leaves us with a full Chalakas Haaretz. What is interesting, just before we even start today, is to notice that the land of ancient Israel was further north than the land of current state of Israel. Okay? Which means to say, is if you look at it, it starts further north. We don't have Eilat at this point in time. It really goes down to just below Be'er Sheva, and in the regions of the Midbar, just to the crater of Ramon. That area does not go down all the way to the sea. But in terms of the northern reaches, as opposed to the boundary which we have today with Lebanon, which is around about here. Actually, no, 1 second. The border is over here. It would stretch all the way up to essentially the Litani River. So, whenever you have these people talking about Israel occupying Lebanon until the Litani River, it means to say coming back to our ancestral territory. Yes, that's what we're trying to do. But nonetheless, that's where it goes. So it reaches further north and starts further north in terms of the actual landmass itself. As we looked at beforehand, we know that the coastal plain itself was mostly unoccupied by Israel, and that's because there was the Philistines, who are not a natural nation to the land of Israel. I've heard on sometimes the historic channel, or people saying, the Palestinians trace their heritage back to the ancient Philistines. I'm like, I don't think so. They were not serving the fish gods of the sea, and they were not pagans that came from Crete. So they were not natural, they themselves were not natural inhabitants, but they mostly controlled the coastal plain, so it's not as elaborate. Probably a lot of Western Manasseh was not reaching the sea, a lot of Yehuda was not reaching the sea. That we'll have to wait until the times of Shaul and David. Okay, but be it as it may, that is what we have. When unpacking this particular chapter, there's a few interesting details. Let's focus on 3 tribes that stand out. One tribe which stands out is the tribe of Shimon. Unlike any of the other tribes, we're told an interesting fact. Look at the end of the first pasuk. In pasuk Aleph in the perek, it says, "Vayetze hagoral hasheni," the second of the 7 lots goes to Shimon. L'matzei b'nei Shimon mishkosam vayhi nachalasam b'soich nachalas b'nei Yehuda. And they were among the division of Yehuda. We see all the different areas of Shimon, and then you have a map if you want to see it on the actual pages, the actual handout itself on page 3. That Shimon is a landlocked mass within Yehuda. It's part of Yehuda itself, which is strange, right? Meaning none of the other tribes belong internally in another territory, right? But Shimon actually belongs totally inside of Yehuda, which makes us wonder, why is that? Why would Shimon be somewhat deficient when it came to his land? So the reason is if you go back to the brachos, the blessings given to Yaakov to his children, who were the actual Shvatim, and Moshe in his brachos to the tribes later on, in the hundreds of years later, as about into the land of Israel. So in the brachos of Yaakov, listen to the bracha Yaakov gives. It isn't so much of a bracha. If you're receiving this as a bracha, you probably wouldn't be so happy. But you were told the following. Yaakov says, Shimon v'Levi achi klei chamas mecharosehem. Shimon and Levi, you're using stolen tools of trade, meaning you went into war, and war is not the modality of our operating. It says, I'm not going to be involved in their plots or their congregations. Why? They killed a man and they crippled an ox. Now, obviously, here there's a lot of veiled ideas here. Clearly, explicitly is referring to the massacre in Shechem, but perhaps in a veiled attempt there might be a Yosef idea there of Ikrushar, but be it as it may, there's a criticism of their drastic action as it appears multiple times. And then he closes this paragraph, I won't say a blessing, but he closes this as by saying, Arura pom ki azer ki kashasa, I will curse their anger because it is strong. I will divide them up among Jacob, and I will scatter them among Israel. So we're told that there seems to be something that they're not going to be either on the most basic level next to each other. Right? So the most basic level is afitzei, means that I'm not going to allow them to be near each other, because it seems when they're next to each other, it's like the two kids in class, right? Anybody's ever been a teacher, or maybe you've been one of those kids, right? It's just, they're all right to have you in class, just not next to so-and-so, right? So maybe it could be, is achal kaim, could mean, is I'll divide them up so they won't be near each other. But perhaps it could also mean is that they won't have the same type of nachala. Notice, if you look at all the tribes of Israel, you will notice and one is absent, and that is Levi. Levi is not there. He does not get. Afitzayim be Yisrael means, as we're going to get to the next two chapters, he's going to be spread out among cities. He doesn't have land. What about Shimon? The answer is that Shimon seems to not also really have land. He's almost like he's like a leasing within Yehuda. But it gets more than that. If you fast forward to the blessings of Yehoshua Rabbeinu, what does he say about Shimon? The answer is, he doesn't. If you go to the blessings of Moshe Rabbeinu, and you can know these off by heart, because if you've been around on a Simchas Torah or beforehand, you hear the blessings on Simchas Torah all the time, and you will notice that Shimon does not appear. Shimon is out of the blessings of Moshe Rabbeinu. And Rashi acknowledges this, the Mefarshim acknowledge this, and they say, actually, he's echoed. Because he may not be explicit, but he's implicit. Where is that? The second blessing goes, of Moshe Rabbeinu is V'zois Yehuda vayomar. This is the blessing to Yehuda, and he said, Shema Hashem kol Yehuda. Let God hear the voice of Yehuda ve'lamot tavienu, and bring him to his people. Rashi says that's an interesting verbiage, right? Shema Hashem kol Yehuda. Rashi says because that's the hint to Shimon. Shimon is found in the echo of Yehuda's blessing, right? And the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu does not include him is because he is very angry at the way Shimon conducted themselves very recently in the area called Baal Peor, which is around about Trans-Jordan East Bank, where there was a whole episode with the daughters of Moab and Midian, and the leader of that was from the tribe of Shimon, and that person's name was? Zimri ben Salu, who was the head, the prince, the statesman of Shimon, and so therefore he excluded him from the blessing. But he put him into the echo of the blessing, which is where Yehuda is as well. Which is fascinating, because then it really comes down to the fact that both the patriarch of the people and the teacher, or the leader of the people, both have problems with Shimon. And in a certain sense, Shimon's echo is found in Yehuda. Right? So meaning, if you think about it, we've seen this a number of times now, the geography reflects the emotions or the descriptions beforehand. Right? So we saw how in Vayigash Elav Yehuda, how Binyamin is the wedge between Yehuda and Yosef, and he does appear geographically as such. Shimon is removed from the count, whether it's because of his actions in the time as a person of Yaakov, or later on at the time of the desert, but he's found as an echo in Yehuda, which is why he's landlocked into Yehuda. So we're seeing the geography reflecting this. It is interesting if you want to trace this further, and I don't see so many people have written about this, but it's interesting that we don't hear so much about Shimon later on. Meaning to say, like, let's say when the kingdom divides, boom, right? The kingdom divides along the Benjamin line, right? That's going to be our north-south boundary. We don't hear so much about Shimon. Whether that means that Shimon migrated northwards, whether that means that Shimon enculturated into Yehuda, it's not easy to know what happens afterwards, but at least at the beginning, here's where he starts. That's our beginning of this. Now, here's the biggest question. Dr. Siklik has been asking me this question for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, which is the biggest question and the biggest problem of questions is, let's take a look at the lot of Zevulun, right? The lot of Zevulun is over here, and the reason why you can get this, the reason why you know this is the area of Zevulun is very simple, is you trace the cities, meaning if you read the Psukim here, it tells you which city goes where, and so you can follow the boundary of Zevulun. And if you follow the northern and eastern boundary, let's say as an example, in Pasuk Yud Gimel in our chapter, it says, Misham Avar Kedma Mizracha, the boundary went eastwards, Gita, Chefer Ita Katzin, V'yotza Rimon HaMetoar HaNe'ar. So we can trace where those ancient cities are. V'nosav HaSagvul Mitzvon HaChanoson, Vayutatasav Gei Yiftach Kel. Right, so it goes to the area of Gei Yiftach Kel, which is around about there. So we know where Zvulun's boundaries are if you go to the ancient cities. The problem is that all sounds very nice, but I will remind you of a teaching that all of us had when we went to day school, and it's reflected in any picture of Zvulun on any stained glass windows. Is the picture of Zvulun is always the ship, right? Why is the ship? Because that's the blessing that Yaakov gave to him. Zvulun lechof yamim yishkon. He will dwell by the chof, which is the coast, right? V'hu lechof oniyos, and he will be by the sea with the ships. V'yakosad Sidon, and he'll reach Sidon. Sidon is a further northern Phoenician city. And in fact, the Gemara deepens this. And fascinatingly enough, we always know that Yisachar is the one who has opportunity to learn Torah because Zevulun is supporting him. How do we know Zevulun supports him? Because he's the trader, like the Phoenicians, who are the seafaring people who trade, not conquer. So too Zevulun is a seafaring person who sets up great, elaborate trade dynasties, which help support his brother. And so this is what we're told. In fact, if you go to the bracha, I didn't put this in, but the bracha of Moshe Rabbeinu, it matches. How do we know that Moshe Rabbeinu's bracha to Zvulun matches? Because he says a very enigmatic statement, but he says, Usmune temune chol, which means you're going to be blessed with something which hides in the sand. What's he referring to? Referring to the trade that relates to the tcheles. Because, in fact, the tcheles is from some sea creature, which is a snail which is found off the coast of northern Israel, really from Zichron Yaakov up with northwards. If we go there, you'll find the Murex trunculus is found everywhere off the coast. You can go into the rock pools. It's a protected species, so you can't harvest it in Israel. Let's say in Spain, it's not protected, which is where it's in Croatia. It's not protected, which is where people are harvesting it today. But in the northern reaches, that's where you find the Murex trunculus, which is a snail, which is a gland which renders the blue and purple dye, by the way. Argamon and tcheles both come from the same creature. So, which means that Moshe Rabbeinu is blessing him with access to something which is hiding in the sand of the coast. These snails do not migrate inwards, right? They're not very fast. They live in rock pools, right? So if that's the case, okay, both Moshe Rabbeinu and Yaakov Avinu seem to say that Zvulun is going to be getting the sea, and he doesn't get the sea line. Now, you may say, well, it was a lottery, and that was just unfortunate. But we would like to imagine that HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated that lottery to match the reality, right? So how do we deal with this? Now, we're not the first people to discover America. It's not like suddenly, like here today in the 21st century, we said, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. This was a known problem, a known problem throughout the century. So as an example, the Gemara describes, remember we learned this Gemara beforehand, but here's how, this little detail we may not have noticed. The Gemara was describing the lottery process. So it's describing how they had, the different lots, and Moshe and Yehoshua and Elazar put their hands in and said, this is going to be for so-and-so, based on the Urim V'Tumim, and they pull out that lottery. In source 7, the Gemara says, Vaya mechavein baruch HaKadosh Baruch Hu Zvulun oile tchum Akko oile imo. So it's the example given of one of the territories was Zvulun and Akko. Where's Akko? Akko is a port city. It's a very ancient port city found in this horn over there. So it describes that Zvulun was found on Akko. So Tosfos already says, no, that doesn't make so much sense. Right, look at source 8. Lav Akko mamish. It can't mean Accra. It's not that city. Right? The Akko michelik Asher. Dirsiv of Asher lo hirish Yoshe Akko elo kalamar tchum shebetzad Akko. Tosfos already points out, no. He did not reach Akko. He was getting close to it, but it was not quite there. So meaning to say, we know that it's not there. And the Mefarshim, it's interesting. If you look at all the Mefarshim on the Torah, meaning in Sefer, in Bereshis, and in Zos HaBracha, everybody says, no, he had the sea. Right? So all the Mefarshim, the classic Mefarshim, which is why it's important to learn Navi. Right? So this is why we're here. We're deepening our experience of Judaism, because this is not the way that we're taught at school. All the Mefarshim say he had the sea. There are those Mefarshim who kind of try to thread this needle. Now, by the way, just to be fair, most of the Mefarshim we learn on Tanakh never lived in the land of Israel, right? So just to be fair, the Malbim, the Abarbanel, Rashi, the Chizkuni, the Bartanura, the Ramban, yes. The Ramban, we will see a number of things the Ramban says when he moves to Israel. But most of the Forshim were working with a Tanakh in hand and the vast knowledge of all of Torah Shabbal Peh, but they were not operating with geographical acumen. So just to appreciate, so it's not always fair to say, but the truth is, if you spend a little bit of time in the Yehoshua perek and you map out those boundaries, you will see that it does not reach the sea. But just to appreciate this, most of the Mepharshim were not misyaches, they don't turn to this. The Vilna Gaon does. The Rav Eliyahu Kramer does relate to us, and as he points out in his commentary on Yehoshua, he says, this is source 9, he says, Chanoson, what's this? That's the word that's used to describe the eastern boundary of it. Nish'ar me'orei Zvulun ad Gei Yiftach. Okay, that's what the pasuk says. It says, V'sham mafsik be'emtza gvul asher, holech ad Sidon Rabba, v'sham ispashet ksas l'roicha ketavnis yerech. So he argues that in fact there is a land bridge. There's a yerech, which is sort of a connection to the sea, which goes from the territory of Zevulun. So he had coastal access through, maybe it's a highway, where it's a yerech, and that's what it means. Yar kasoy ad Sidon is the yerech. He had some sort of yerech, yerech literally means a leg or a thigh, which stretched out to the sea. And so what the Vilna Gaon is trying to do is square the blessings in the Torah with the reality in Yehoshua, and seeing it in the words of Yehoshua as Yar Katai. Again, it's not such an easy read, but you will see such maps as an example. So, I came across a really fascinating essay which is called "The Paleogeographic Research as an Aid to Understanding the Boundaries of the Territory of the Tribe of Zebulun." Now, folks, isn't that a great title for an essay, right? So this is really, clearly meaning this is our topic, which means that just to point things out is that some people were actually spending a lot of time trying to figure this out. Here's the essay itself. It's in Hebrew. It's excellent. It's written by Micha Klein and Avram Frank, and it's a really excellent essay on this topic, 13-page essay on this topic. They do an excellent amount of research, and they point out that if you look at most of the maps are problematic in this regard as well. So, for instance, in the 1802, this is from Surah Aretz Ligvul Osea, you will see, by the way, notice the orientation of the map at the bottom of page 5. There is actually, not the way orientation, our orientation of maps today is north facing upwards, right? That's our orientation, but that's really, that's just a convention. There's no reason why it should be like that. Most maps of Israel are actually the other way. They were flipped. Right, so you'll notice the Yam HaGadol is at the bottom. That's the sea. You'll see Asher on the bottom left, and above him is Zvulun. You may actually wonder if that line on the right hand side of the Asher might be that land bridge that perhaps that is described by the Vilna Gaon. But be it as it may, that you see that Zvulun does not have any immediate coastal access in the 1802 map. He has a woodcut from 1513. Again, orientation is not the convention we have today, which is that facing up is east. So you'll see the sea is down there, and there's the Galilee. I'm just going to show where is our Zebulun. It's harder to see in this map. Zebulun is 1 second. So I had it beforehand. I'm on page 6. I'm on page 6. I don't see that. Which one is I would need to look at this again as to where in this woodcut from 1500 Zebulun appears. By the way, notice that these are not Jewish maps. These are Christian maps.
Look where the boat is going to, maybe towards there.
Yeah, no, just notice it says no. You see in the red area, just above Akko, north of Akko, it says Trib Zebulun, right? But that's further up north. Okay. There's a division between Tribya Issachar is to the right of him, and then we have Asher. So I'm not actually sure if that reaches the coast or not in this version. This one from which is written actually in pencil on the map on the top left on page 7 is 1825 from Palestine. That's not because there was a Palestinian nation. That's just because it was the Roman designation of this, and of course this is clearly trying to match the biblical descriptions. You see Zevulun is actually in an orange boundary there, Zebulun, and clearly does not come to the coast, right? So, meaning if you look at most of the maps of the tribes throughout the ages, you'll see they don't. However, there is one fascinating map which is worth considering, and this is a map which is it's called Carta de la Terra Santa. And in this map, we have an interesting anomaly. Okay, this is of Palestine. This is on page 8. See the map at the top there? When you look at the tribe of Zevulun, if you go and if you zoom in, and I zoomed in, I brought it in over there, you'll notice something interesting, and that is there is an inlet. Do you notice that? Yeah. There's an inlet which touches Zebulun. Right, you can see in there, it's Zebulun, right? That's Zevulun. So what does that mean? So the argument in this essay, well, from Michael Klein and Avram Frank, is really fascinating, and that is that we have a number of anomalies in biblical descriptions of coastline areas and what the reality we have today. One example is Yehoshua is going to describe, he has prophecies about all the nations around him. And one of the prophecies he has is about Tyre. Tyre is a city in Hebrew, what's that called in Hebrew? Tzor, okay? Tzor is right over here. Tyre is over here. It's a city today in today's Lebanon. Tyre was one of the capital cities of Phoenicia. The Phoenicians really were the greatest trading merchant nations of the Mediterranean, not just the Middle East. And in fact, they were essentially allied to Israel for most of their time. They had an alliance. They provided most of the supplies to the Beis Hamikdash. Later on, we're going to see the relationship between Hiram, who's the king of Tyre, and David HaMelech. And there's a lot of wonderful connections there. Some more complicated connections because later on, Jezebel is in fact a pagan Phoenician who marries Achav. So it's more complicated when the enculturation starts happening. But nonetheless, we know about Tyre, and Yehoshua, when describing Tyre, describes it as an island which trades with all the islands of the Mediterranean, right? But the problem is that if you go to Tyre today, Tyre is a peninsula. It's not an island, right? So that means to say there is a land passage to Tyre. It is not an island in this ancient city. Why? How do we account for the discrepancy? The answer is paleogeography has pointed out that in fact it was an island at the times of Yehoshua. But for a number of reasons, whether it was the receding of the sea and also the bringing up of the very fine sand on the shallow coast layers, actually created a peninsula over the course of the last 3,000 years to create the land bridge that we have in Tyre, which we didn't have in those days. In a similar way, it's been found that if you do archaeology in the area of the north of Akko, you will find a lot of remains of what seems to be sea life in that area. And in fact, the argument is that the area north of Akko was an estuary to the Kishon River, because this is a river over here which reaches Zevulun, which means that there was an estuary. The sea was actually more of an inlet into the landmass, which is over the course of the last 3,000 years slowly receded. And we can see that in the remains in that area, all being estuarian outgrowths or remains. And so the map, therefore, that we're looking at over here is actually an accurate rendition of Zevulun touching the sea. And if you flip the page to page 9, here would be actually what the coastline would look like, meaning the Kishon River had a large estuary which reached the sea. It would have perhaps been marshlands, swamplands even, as well, which would mean that would actually put Zevulun touching the edge of a deep estuary. This boundary is perhaps not as accurate, to go a little further north, and it would reach the sea, which means that the reason why we're asking the question is because we're anachronists. We don't have the geography of the yesteryear, and this has been a slow process of the landfill, the natural landfill, which is of North Akko, which is fascinating, right? So therefore, actually, Moshe Rabbeinu and Yaakov Avinu were referring to the reality of the times, which is that they did have port access. You don't need to create the land bridge, because a land bridge was created over time, essentially, which is in the opposite way to the Vilna Gaon's observation. Just fascinating, a lot to discuss over here. Now, one other little interesting anomaly, and that is with the tribe of Dan. Take a look at the tribe of Dan. Most of this is names of cities, and it is really fascinating to trace them, but not for the minimum time that we have on a weekly basis. But take a look at Dan's description here. It's on page 2. Dan, we have in Pasuk Mem Zayin. We have the following. Vayetze gevul b'nei Dan mehem, vayalu b'nei Dan, vayachamu im leshem. Vayilkadu osa, vayaku osa lefi cherev, vayurshu osa, vayeshu ba, vayikru leleshem Dan, kashem Dan aviyah. So Dan lives over here. But it sounds like they weren't so satisfied with their land territory. You can see it's not so expansive, and certainly if you take into account that the coastal plain dominated by the Philistines, not so much left, right? So they were not so happy, so they conquered a city called Leshem, and they called it Dan, right? So as opposed to the other tribes, we've had a similar encounter with Yosef. But now Yosef says, look, Yehoshua, we don't have enough land. And then Yehoshua either acquiesces or doesn't acquiesce. It's not clear from the Pesukim whether he gives them more land over here, which belonged to Yisachar, or he said, no, go fight the land and figure it out. We saw there was a little bit of ambiguity in that discussion. But be it as it may, they complained, but they didn't have a solution. Dan didn't complain, he had a solution. Right? So what did he do? Instead of coming to the leader and saying, you do something for us, they did something for them. Right, so what was the something for them? They can't go to a place called Leshem. This is interesting because if you go to Sefer Shoftim, you'll see a similar story. And that's a story where the tribe of Dan goes and conquers an area called Laish. And that area called Laish, it's not, by the way, it's not a very happy story. So just to fill you in, I don't want to give away the end, but if you go to Sefer Shoftim and you read the story there, it's not a good story. What happens is that Dan is unsatisfied with their portion. And it's an undated story, so we don't know if it comes at the beginning of the time of the Shoftim or the end of the time of Shoftim. It's placed at the end of the book. It's the area called Pesel Mecha, right? But Birazameh, the tribe of Dan are doing a foraging mission. They're going up northwards to find more territory. They pass by in Har Ephraim. Har Ephraim is the range of mountains in the center here. They pass by an area which is called the Pesel Mecha, which is a shrine. There's a fellow called Micha. He wasn't so satisfied with the Mishkan and Shiloh. He kind of needed his own shop, so he got himself his own priest. He got himself his own shrine. Not clear if they were serving God there or not, but it doesn't sound like it was a really good thing at all. And they come across this. The shrine tells them, "You'll be." The priest says, "You'll be successful." And it's always very good. Like just tell them the good things, and maybe it'll work out, right? So that's what he does. They go up and they go find an area called Laish. They come back and they say, this is a good thing. And when they decide to take all their people out with their army, they decide to abduct the shrine as well. So they take the shrine with them, right? And so they go off and they conquer a place called Leshem or Laish. The Mepharshim point out that Leshem and Laish is the same place, just different names. And it is found right over here, just next to what's the Har Hermon, which is over here. In an area which today is called Tel Dan. So you can go visit the Banyas, right? So you can visit that area. It is one of the sources of the Jordan River, right? Which is where the Dan spring is to be found. You can go and visit there. It's in the northern part of the Golan Heights. It's on the border of the Golan Heights over here. Just really towards the northern border by Syria and Lebanon. And that's where Dan is. That's where Leshem is to be found. Here's a little confusing why Tanakh mentions it twice, right? And with slightly different names. It's clearly the same place because it's the same story. It seems to be that this is what's called telescoping. Telescoping is that this didn't happen in the times of Yehoshua. This happened later, but Tanakh puts it in to tell us it will happen right later on, which is another indicator that clearly Yehoshua didn't finish his whole book. Somebody like perhaps Shmuel, as is observed, added in the little pieces to say, by the way, he got more, right? To tell us that. For more details, go to Sefer Shoftim and we'll find the actual story itself. Now, a few things that are interesting about this place. First of all, is you can go for archaeological digs. There's a lot of exciting things going on there because you can see the Canaanite ruins and actually maybe even a little specific, the Phoenician ruins. Leshem or Laish was a Phoenician city. It was not a Canaanite city, which means, just clarifying point over here, it was not in their mandate to wipe out. That's an important point. Is if they'd wanted to do their job, they should have wiped out the rest of the Canaanites in their area. That's when they should have done their job. They didn't. They found a unobstructive, not allied city, and they killed it. And the reason they killed it, the Tanakh tells us later on, they wiped it out, is because it did not have allies nearby, which makes sense because most of the Phoenicians were coast livers, right? They lived on the coast, and so Leshem was too far away for them to help. That's not a good thing. Meaning, they should have just sat down and done their job there. Right, so this is not a praise of the tribe of Dan, but they take this city which is living by itself. Okay, so they conquer this city called Leshem. Clearly, they're not so not doing the right thing in terms of the theology of here because they're taking a shrine with them. Later on, we're going to know this is going to be a complicated place because another reason why we know this place is because in the times later on in Yeravam ben Nevat, where he splits the kingdom. Where he takes the northern kingdom, most of the tribes of Israel, which is going to be the country called Israel, this is going to be called Judea. When he splits it up, he realizes that you can't have a political state which is independent with a religious pilgrimage to another state, right? So what he does is the first thing is that he closes the borders so that Israelites are not making pilgrimage to Jerusalem. But you can't have people not making pilgrimages, so what does he do? He does the one thing the Torah pretty much says you shouldn't do. And that is he makes not just one golden calf, but he makes 2 golden calves, right? And he creates his own shrines. This is pretty bad, right? So we're going to get there soon. He puts one of the golden calves in the southernmost city, which is Beit El, which is over here. And then he puts the northernmost golden calf in a place called Dan, which is over there. So you see he actually frames his kingdom with 2 golden calves, and the northernmost one goes in Dan. So it's got a bad history. You can go and actually go to the excavations and see the Phoenician ruins. You can see the Jewish ruins, because it's very clear that this was lived in by Israelites. So everything corroborates the story that we're talking about. This is the addition of Dan. There's a debate in the Mefarshim. Did Dan completely bring his folks up north? It doesn't seem that that's the way. It seems that they left a whole bunch there, and they just had an expansion party who went to the north and settled over here. It shouldn't be lost upon us that Dan is now living next to his brother Naphtali, right? Because remember, they're brothers from the same mother. So it is interesting that Dan, who was separated from his birth mother's ancestry, is now living next to Naphtali. Just again, geography relating to geology. What's the word for family? Genealogy. Thank you so much. Good. There's also something which also shouldn't be lost as well. Take a look at the choshen, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol on bottom of page 10. If you look where Dan appears, which is I think a lot of Aaron HaKodeshes have this on it, you'll notice that look where Dan is. Dan is the 3rd row down, first column, starting from the right, yeah? So we can work out what stone he is, because you just go back to the Torah, and in Parashas Truma describes what the stones were. So 3rd row down, first stone is Vatura Shlishi, that this is the 3rd row, is Leshem Shavoy V'Achlama, which means the name of his stone is actually the name of the city, which may also reflect the change in name in Yehoshua versus Shoftim, is it probably was called Laish. Laish was probably the name of the city, and Tanakh is giving an appellation called Leshem, I think almost in a certain sense to undercut him, right? Because this is supposed to be his honor. Don is supposed to have a stone of honor, and it's not really. He's sort of conquering a place which becomes Leshem. Maybe he calls it Leshem, but really he calls it Dan as well. I'll leave a little interesting question for you, is that this is not the first time we've heard of Dan. If you go to Parshas Lech Lecha, this is why we should be doing Shnai Mirko, listening very carefully to the Torah reading. It describes how Avraham Avinu chases in the war of the 4 and the 5 kings, Dan. Yeah. Right? Well, now, that means he went to there. That's clearly where he went to, right? Which this city has a long history. But the question is, why would the Torah in Bereshis, which is well before there is even a Dan person, right, call it Dan, right? That is a question. Is that because it's Al Shema Atid, because the future is called Dan? Or is there another Dan? This is a question I will leave for you. But be it as a mate, if you ever want to go to Israel and you want an adventure, go to what's called Tel Dan, and you will see the remains of this city called Leshem, which is described as well. Fascinating, and it's really beautiful. It's really beautiful. You have all the rivers in the SPS.
If Dan's inheritance was that area,
yep,
what gave him the right to conquer an area so much further?
We're going to deal with that in Shoftim. Shoftim becomes the reign of anarchy. We're going to see right now we have centralized leadership. We're going to move into decentralized leadership. In decentralized leadership, Ish Hayashar Be'nav Yaseh, which is the refrain of Sefer Shoftim, which is anarchy. So we're going to see that as well. Last point, and we're going to close with this, and that is the Ralbag. The Ralbag points out at the end of this, and I apologize. I'm sorry. I'm going over time. At the very end of this, we're told at the end of the perek that Yehoshua gets his own city. Look at the very end of the perek, and this is as it closes in pasuk Nun. This is the 50th pasuk on page 2. Al pi Hashem nasnu loy es ha'ir asher sha'al es timnas serach. So he received a city as he requested, like Kalev had was fine and received a city. He got Hebron. So Yehoshua requests a city, and he calls the city Timnas Serach, and in Har Ephraim. Okay, so just to clarify this, again, there's a discrepancy between Sefer Shoftim and Sefer Yehoshua as to the name. One is Timnas Serach, and the other one is Timnas Cheres. In Sefer Shoftim appears as Timnas Cheres. The Gemara looks at that and says, which one is it? And so the Gemara answers, it was Timnas Cheres. Cheres, what does Cheres mean?
Pottery.
Pottery. It was began as a mound of pottery, meaning very unirrigatable, non-fertile land, and it turned into serach, which was something which was overflowing. So meaning to say, he received it as a non-good piece of land, and he developed it into a fantastic a land as well. This is important for an important reason, that is that sometimes you see leaders who get themselves voted in or take power, and then very soon afterwards they change the zoning, and there's a development going on, right? And you kind of wonder, like, how does this work exactly? And Yehoshua was not that way. First of all, you'll notice the Ralbag points out, he gets his land when? At the very end, after everybody else gets their land. That's when it's listed. And number two is that the territory he gave for himself was a very, very humble territory. It was not very fertile, and he developed it to be fertile. And it's also just to appreciate this is not something which is to be lost on us. And
where is it?
Where is it? Good question. So there actually happen to be two archaeological suggestions as to where Timnath Serach is today. If you go to Israel today, there is the kever of Yehoshua and Kalev, which is in Timnath Serach, which is actually in what used to be an Arab village there as well. It's guarded, but you can go visit. It's guarded by the Israeli military as well. We will be visiting it, Be'ezrat Hashem, in February. So we're going to go there. That's the classic one. However, just recently, 3 years ago, in 2022, the Jerusalem Post announced, let's put this on the last page, there's another area which archaeologists are suggesting, which is called Kirbat Tibna. Now remember, whenever you see the word Kirbat, which is Arabic, it means, in Hebrew, Churvat. Right? That's clearly the parallelation. So whenever you're Kirbet, it's referring to Churbat, the destruction of Tibna, and they believe, so they're doing it now. This is not a finished job, but it says, the article observes that it's located on a hill in the southwest of the Samaria region, east of Sham near Chalamish. The site was populated from the Bronze Age until the beginning of the Ottoman period. Archaeologists began digging at Kirbet Tibna in the West Bank, a site where humans have settled for about 4,000 years and is believed to where the biblical Joshua lived and was buried. The excavation project at the site is announced on Monday. This was published in July 22. So there are two. There's the traditional site, which is where there's the typical domed burial spot. But there is another argument that it might be close by in a place called Kirbet Tibna. Either way, these are the two possibilities of this location, which is obviously in the area of Har Ephraim, this area over here. We will be going to visit Be'ezrat Hashem, the more classical one, Be'ezrat Hashem, unless there's more news and there's more we'll call it finalized information, which will be about this place called Kirbet Tibna, because this is ultimately where he. What was that?
It's in Jordan.
No, it's in Ephraim. In Ephraim, because remember, Yehoshua is from the tribes of Ephraim, so that's where he ultimately gets his city, and that's where he buries him. He gets himself buried because his family plot is over there as well. So now, at this point in time, we can now efficiently say we have seen the division of all the 12 tribes, which is a very big achievement, and we've seen that being not just a list of names, but a lot of drama and stories behind the names from then until now. What is ahead of us in the few coming chapters is the Arei Miklat, the Arei Levian, and then our first secession from the Union, the first set of tribes who want to start leaving this Union, which we'll get to Be'ezrat Hashem in the coming